what, a $3,000 check? Actual, plus or minus, but.
430 kids at one point.
Hmm?
430 kids, not
What?
including staff.
Not
Right.
now.
437, yeah.
Have quite problems. Through this so much. I just want to kind of.
You get your blanket and some Earl Grey or.
Some real gray.
Nice.
All right, now we should be on the
You're
phone,
not
I mean,
going the
the,
right way, Dave. You gotta go the other way. A little bit harder.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
the thing.
Look who you're talking
Morning.
to.
That's right.
We should be on the screen.
Remember we appear to be on the.
Yeah, but the sound is what I was
Voice, yeah.
trying to say, but I had to actually string
Marguerite.
one word together, and that was not really going so well.
Which one was that?
One with a rum on it.
Oh, yeah.
Whoops, we didn't know that was here.
I'll never forget that kid when I built that ship, it was down below and that guy with the British uniform. And everybody said they were recharged the ship or something. I don't remember exactly. And he's sitting there and all of a sudden all these guys come running down the hill at him, where'd he go? And like, holy goodness. He was working at somewhere. What was
We
his
have a
name?
copy machine.
He was working at somewhere.
Yeah, here's the agenda.
I think the one right over there.
Oh, I only need one
Actually,
direction.
used 15, 20.
Many lights up. You have all kinds of.
It's 28.
Hmm?
20 should, maybe 15, I don't know, 15 probably fine.
Howdy.
Hi, Mike, how are you?
Good, how you doing?
Well, thanks for coming by.
Yeah, I'm sorry I missed the first couple.
That's all right.
Oh, it was.
More than one place
It
at a
was
time.
riveting.
Yeah, I know how that works. Know how that works.
Still not speaking to the words.
You can blame me.
No, blame her.
Not the fastest machine ever, but at least it doesn't have a crank,
Well, you know,
so. yeah. Here's your
I don't
original.
know, I kind of miss those old mimeographs.
You like the smell of it. I know. But you're on camera, by the way.
Don't make me some more.
You're like an agenda.
So how was the first stop printing service?
I'm setting.
Writing letters and whatever.
No, I've been doing homework. I've been doing, trying to figure this out.
Well, there's a lot to figure out.
Well, bringing up my knowledge of the truck.
Excellent. I'm gonna leave the remaining copies right here and here. To anyone who comes in. I like your tie, by the way.
A modern bolo,
Right,
really.
right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Digital bowler. Bizarre. Oh. My goodness. I have an idea.
Excuse my cord.
Yeah.
Don't write it down soon.
Whoops.
It's gonna be.
I don't need all this.
Oh, there's my bullet. Board report. Oh, there's lots of stuff. Sarah's been given something. That's awesome. I haven't been working.
Wait, your ID.
Yeah, but I don't know. Yes.
I don't know.
You wanna
Hey.
How are you?
I would be happy to.
How's everything?
I
Don't forget your ID.
You did well in
Yeah,
your.
right. Give me 1 second.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
It won't take me long.
He has yet to write it down or express it, so.
CRS. I gotta write down CRS. That's all I have to do.
No record of it.
Extracurricular activity.
Yeah.
CRS.
Not just
Now I've got it written down
baseball,
and then when I
basketball, soccer.
go to actually finish the board report, I can flesh that out with that actually.
So you got a whole week.
It seems to be in 2012. We took- we were state champions in.
Yes, yeah, he said I have all. All right, you want me to add you in?
Yep.
And,
As the co-host.
yeah, I just.
They played mostly, well, no, they played
Move it back over
JV
onto this screen because I can't
from
control it while it's up there.
Division III and Division II, but
So, if I go to the more
we were
button.
whipping up on
make
it. Not
co-host.
been for Division II,
Yeah.
so.
Super simple.
Power to anybody in a meeting?
I never, I used Google Meet the last few years.
Oh,
We didn't
okay.
use Zoom at my last district, so I just never had to do that.
I'm not.
I don't see power well, apparently.
Not sure we knew that about you.
Yeah, no, whoops, well, I'm hired, I got a contract now.
Yeah, there you go. You're in.
Oh my gosh, if I didn't seed power well, I would not have survived into week 6.
I
because
know.
The staff here pick up so much and do so much.
How are your parents doing?
I was just sharing that blessing with somebody recently. I don't know if they was.
I saw
Who
that.
work in a
Yep.
place that where staff just sort of like take on responsibility. And I'm on recorded camera saying that, so that is.
Hey, there you go.
Yeah,
Are you recording already?
yeah, because let's turn it on, just like recording instantly. Because if I don't.
I was, here's my cord.
I found that if I don't set it to auto record.
Yeah.
Like I just. Because there's so much.
Yes. So when Cam gets here, probably the easiest thing for him to do will be to go over
Yeah.
and let him put something. On the Zoom, so that way. It's there to celebrate.
When at, the Act 46. No,
Yeah, I think he's gonna go see that. The school board.
it was a 706 B committee on merging.
Yeah.
Anytime we went to have it. Man, they had a spread.
Told you anything again?
Yeah.
They had it on a spread.
Oh.
Mr. Shelley's.
I'm happy to run it.
Territory.
Yeah, yes, I
Okay.
think these are the.
We hired him at.
Oh, I've read through that.
Yeah,
Smart about it.
Yeah.
But he'll be able to add a little extra color, which would be good.
Very
Well, this was coming in from Boston.
I think he flew into Boston.
Great ideas.
He's now on the road. Doing tour rides with by 6. I have not heard otherwise, although I have a lot of unread emails. You know, as much as email is my job, I actually spend time out of my house. To children and teachers. There's table at the seat.
I didn't miss anything? Oh, it was good. I bet I would have liked it, but.
Time do we have?
It is, I got 5:30.
on the dot.
Yeah, so we start, and
Are we waiting for Sarah? Sarah, we're making it.
Sarah's not gonna attend. She,
Mary Beatty, I don't know. I think she plans to be.
Dave
Marvin's not coming, I know that.
Schilling might make it on Zoom. He's a little under the weather, so he went home after the meetings. And Sarah is not attending.
Yep, you're right. You got it memorized.
Doing a little better. That's why Sarah's good today. Without me to-
Too many.
Go up to
Anything's
them.
Yep.
And, Glenn,
Oh, so Sarah's not here.
but,
It's good mine.
because they like to see up
Do
there.
I have this?
And their dad was
This-
a ham operator. And he said that he liked it up there because he got.
I pay better attention when I take notes.
With his,
I'm the opposite.
It's a
actually,
ham.
so
Mhm.
I'm thankful for you.
Yeah. so.
It seems like a beautiful place.
It is.
To go.
Yeah.
It's a place.
Excellent.
So Mark, I'm gonna take minutes, so if there's any admission, would you do that? while you're here?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's hard to,
Oh,
I find it
you're
hard to-
waiting room?
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
I think we do.
Okay, yeah, I think you
And
do.
I struggle to
I got you.
use this mouse to control that screen.
I know.
Mhm.
So, yeah, it's a little painful. All right, so I think, are we waiting on anybody else or should we?
She has arrived.
Not that
Ah, Here's Mary.
We've been waiting for you.
No,
It's all you.
Yeah, make sure to get an agenda there.
I like the idea of putting the head back.
put you back. I don't want you
Sorry, Dave.
Not. There's a solid bookcases back there.
to- I know, we don't mess around, we don't want anybody hurt.
Oh, it really was.
All right. Well, welcome one and all. So thanks again for coming in today. Looks like we have a full quorum here. Right here. Hey. And Cam, glad you've made it. All right. So
We do a ground of attendance, so I can know where everyone is.
sure, so we'll go around with attendance and just have everybody say their names and
Yeah, we're on, and we are recording, the Zoom is recording, so.
excellent. All right, so to start with, I'm Eric Hewitt.
Larry Wiggleman.
Am I?
Katie White.
Randy Rathburn.
Tim Featherston, huh? Doug Bastiwa. Sean Blackmore.
Mary Beatty.
Thomas Edgar.
Dave Toll.
Rob, Ballavy.
Gary Farrell.
Mark Tucker.
Diana Moore.
I missed that was- Nine, 10, 13, 15. Okay, I missed Doug. No, I got you. Didn't I?
No, you didn't bold me.
I didn't bold you? Sorry.
No,
Where are you?
right
Eric Hewitt.
next to you.
Well, there you go. I got, and I missed Doug, but I got Doug now, so I
Excellent.
think I'm good. And what's your name?
Cam Featherston.
Oh, right, I have you. Good. Sorry, Cam. We haven't met.
Excellent. Okay, so wanted to start off with reviewing essentially what we talked about 2 weeks ago. We had a little bit smaller of a group and a little bit more thorough of a discussion of the facility report that we had. We So first and foremost, we recapped our role from the school board. And that we could actually have membership and have voting so that we can come to a decision about what to advise the school board on. Obviously, we're not making the final decision. And I will be serving as the spokesperson to the school board here next week, as I did in September. And then we also added and welcomed Mary Beatty and Marvin to the group. So that was great last time. And one of the things that we then went through is the facility report, pretty in depth. Marvin Withers, for those that don't know, did maintenance here for many years, and went through the report with a fine-tooth comb. Had a couple of questions about that we walked through, but largely he felt, and he's not here today, so please keep me honest, but he felt that the facility report was largely accurate, and some of the things that he had questions on were mostly things that were coming up to their end of life in a few years, but generally should have been in good shape, like the roof, which was replaced about 20 years ago now, and it has about a 25-year lifespan. And also there was a couple windows also replaced. I believe he pointed that out. So other than that, we had concerns about the veracity of the report and how thorough it was. I think I felt like we put that to bed a couple weeks ago. And if anybody else has any other questions about that, I mean, we can obviously go into those a little bit more. So that was a couple weeks ago. Any questions, concerns? Did I accurately represent all that? Excellent. All right. I already talked about the role of the group. So today we have Mark Tucker, our superintendent here, to talk a bit about our tax impact. And we also have with us from Truex Collins, Cam. So thank you so much for coming up to go through some of the options for us more in depth. I know we all have seen the video or attended one of the walkthroughs, but it'd be really good to get a little bit more in depth with you about some of those options. So that will be what we do today. So anybody else have anything to add to the agenda before we move on to Mr. Tucker?
I have I did some research on capacity. If we could just
Yes.
please touch on that.
All right.
Thank you.
No worries. We'll add capacity to the open discussion.
Yep.
And we'll get through that. All right. Mr. Tucker, the floor is yours. What have you learned about financing these types of projects?
So, yeah, for those who haven't met me, I'm Mark Tucker. I'm the superintendent of schools for Caledonia Central FU. Danville is one of the 7 schools in this SU that I serve. I actually have 2 things that I touched on because there were, I understood there were questions raised last time about the impact of Act 72.
Yes, yeah,
And so I want to present on that as well.
excellent.
I have a presentation that's really in 2 parts. And it starts with some presentation discussion around Act 72. And then it goes into a hypothetical financing model. What I would like to ask the group to do, I will pause and then I get done with the Act 72 portion of it and then take questions. It's kind of it kind of lays out in a narrative form. So if you just board out questions as we go, there's a pretty good chance that I just haven't gotten to that yet. But when we get to the end of that section on Act 72, then anything you don't understand or you want re-explained, or if you think of something that I didn't cover, I'll be happy to take that on. And the same thing with the last part, which is around the hypothetical financing options. Is that okay with everybody?
Excellent.
Okay, so let me start here. So. Whoops. Okay, So what is Act 72 and how might it affect this project? It was House Bill 426. It was redesignated Act 72 of 2021. It required the Agency of Education to do a building inventory of all public schools in the state of Vermont. That inventory is essentially complete. The agency has published a dashboard, and I'm going to jump into that real quick to give you a sense of what's out there. So. Because it did not let me jump from, hang on. This is one of the things I hate about Zoom because you can't just,
Yeah, it's tough to bounce windows.
yeah. I can't bounce windows. So hang on, be patient. This is all the technology.
You're doing fine. We're all with you.
So, I put a link for this in the presentation itself, but it takes a couple steps to bring it up. So what I brought up is what is in this portal, facility portal for Danville School. It was interesting to me looking at this, because I think it supports what we've been saying about the condition of the existing building. If you look at this, things like, elevators, fire suppression, HVAC distribution, life safety, plumbing, roofing, security and notification. According to the inventory that the engineers did, that did this work for the Agency of Education, we're at 100% depleted value on those systems.
Does depleted value mean useful life?
Yes, that's how I understand it. Then Cam's nodding his head, so that's correct. He's my terminology back up here.
100%
On building
value
things.
means they're used up their life expectancy. Is that what that means?
Yeah,
means you're on borrowed time.
doesn't mean that they're not working, but they're
working,
beyond
but they're gonna fail.
their expected lives.
Time to plan for replacement.
Yeah, right. Okay, so this is just more detail on these systems that break down the composition of the systems. Cam, what is FCI? Do you know that term?
Yes, that's Facility Condition Index.
Okay,
There's a couple of ways, there's a couple of things that can mean, but generally it's understood to be the value of repair over the value of replacement. So an FCI of 70 would mean that to repair the facility would cost 70% the cost of replacement.
all right. So according to this index here, they're saying
Sorry,
that,
again, the last,
For example, an FCI of 70% would roughly translate to the repair costs being 70% of replacement costs.
thank you.
okay. So the calculated FCI for this school as it's configured right now is 93.21%. So it's the differential cost for replacement versus renovation on these systems that they measured is pretty tight. You know, it's almost no argument in terms of
93, so
93.21%.
is that,
How is that calculated?
Don't ask me, I don't know.
There's a number of ways to calculate it. You can calculate it straight line from cost estimates to repair versus cost estimates to replace.
Yeah.
You can also look at FCI as a measure of depleted life, which roughly translates to the same thing, because if you have 100% depleted life, means you have to replace everything.
So if you're looking at a roof for 30 years and you've used up the 30 years, you have an SCI of 100%. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
For that one component.
I know, I just wanted.
All right.
Thank you.
One area of potential concern that they flagged, is there is some asbestos containing materials in the building, which we're managing right now. We have a standing abatement plan. That's what it's called. Where we know where the asbestos is in the building. I believe we know where it all is. And it's checked periodically to make sure that those surfaces aren't disturbed. And that was one area. The other thing is, I found this, so this is a list of utilities based on a construction date of 1936. They said our water pressure is marginal.
natural gas or propane pressure is adequate. The electrical capacity is inadequate. That's an area that we pointed out that if you watch the video, you know, we've got 1936 electrical panels in this building that we can't replace components in.
Hey, you know, the community got good value from that.
Yeah, I think, yeah, that's. You know, that's a fair observation.
Yeah, but it's worth.
So I think Danville got its money's worth out of that, but. So let me go back now to my presentation. Okay. So, so there are two other, so the facility inventory is essentially done. And if you go out on, if you want, if you're curious about that stuff, we'll publish the link to that, and you can go out and you can look at all the public schools in the state of Vermont. And, you know, if you're curious, if you want to compare Danville School to any other school and see where we are, and there's actually a facility in here that you can call up other schools right in the same view. So you can look at Danville and then you can compare it to other, like you could bring up the other 6 schools in the SU if you were, you know, curious about that. But there's 2 other things that Act 72 called for. One was a school construction facility standard update. And it requires the AOE and the State Board of Education to update the school construction facility standards. I think that's what one of the points that was brought up last week or last meeting. That work has not been done. The deadline for submission of this work is January 15th of 2023. So basically when the legislature comes back into session. Also due on January 15th is a recommendation from the State Board to update and adopt a capital outlay financing formula. That is a formula for distributing money that requires somebody to push money in one end of the formula. And we'll talk about that in a second. So changes to the school construction standards are relevant in terms of the project design for a new or renovated school here at Danville. Absolutely are. I think what I understood, and correct me if I'm wrong, from the last meeting, people were saying, you know, well, if we don't know what the new standards are going to be, how can we move forward? The updated and adopted capital outlay financing formula is just a roadmap for spending money, and there's nothing behind it. Those 2 tasks in Act 72 are intended to inform the legislature, that along with the facilities inventory. So what we might be facing, the state might be facing in terms of a restart of the state aid to school construction, which just stopped in 2007 was the last year that anybody got any state aid to school construction. Regarding the construction standard revisions, according to Secretary French last week, he told some other people that the AOE is likely going to ask for an extension of their January 15th deadline. So if the legislature grants that extension, and that's an if, I don't know what they're going to do. I don't know what he's going to do because I don't think he has it ready. So, you know, I guess they're going to have to give him an extension, but I don't know an extension to when. And while no one knows what the changes eventually are going to be, there's no reason to believe the existing classrooms here in this building are going to meet those standards. We already know they're too small. And it doesn't take, you know, they might have been fine in 1996. The last time the standards were published. They're not. There's no doubt in my mind that they are not going to meet the new standards when they're published. Regarding the capital outlay financing formula, right now, the legislature hasn't determined how the state would pay for any state aid to school construction. There's no pool of money sitting out there, either from the state or from federal sources. There was, I understand, without knowing the details, there was some money in the, I think they call it the Build Back Better plan that did not pass Congress, that was designated for states to use for improving school facilities. We don't have that money. I don't know if somebody's going to come up with money. So the point I want to make here is it could be a long and unnecessary delay to wait for this aid, because any future grant of state aid can actually be used to offset costs in a partially completed construction project. And I'll talk about that.
Can be, you said? Pardon? Can be used?
Can be, sure. Okay. So it's not like you have to have, if we don't have state aid to construction, and we get it later on, we can apply it to, against the cost of whatever we decide to do, renovate or build. Okay? And any money that we might get in the future from the state or, you know, the state, the feds through the state, we can always apply it to reduce the local project costs. Okay, any questions about Act 72? If you didn't catch the intimation here, I'm arguing to this group that it doesn't make sense to wait for the new standards, because we have so many other things that we can be doing that are not dependent on the standards. I also think, you know, from talking with Truax Cullen over the months or couple of years that we've been doing this, that they are tuned into 21st century school design. They're not looking at the 1996 standards for school construction. So, Cam, you want to say something?
Yeah, a couple things. So those standards that are published, you know, there's an important distinction to make here for people that those are not educational standards. Those are reimbursement standards. That is essentially the amount of space that the state saw fit to reimburse for a portion of. So they would say, if you have to build at least, this is the difference. They would say, you have to build at least this much. And if you build more, we won't reimburse you for the extra. Right, so it was a minimum standard meant to identify how much could be reimbursed for, but it wasn't intended as a limit on the size of spaces. And in fact, you'll find if you go to schools around the state and around the country that have been built over the decades, most of them are going to have spaces which are larger than what those state standards are, even when the schools were built 20, 30, 50 years ago. So it's an important distinction that those standards were never intended to say, this is the appropriate size for education. And even if they were, the education in those days was so fundamentally different. I mean, they would put, when these schools were being built, they would put, you know, 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds in desks in rows, which is the smallest possible footprint for a group of kids. And we all know, because of advancements in education, that kids don't just learn by being lectured to, especially little kids. They learn by using their hands, they learn through play, they learn through activity, with groups, with small groups. And so classrooms need to have more space than just desks in rows in order for the school to actually try and meet the educational standards of today. So what we've done is to build on what Marcus said is we have our own standards and recommendations based on the activities that are needed. And we're looking at the building codes, life safety codes. We're looking at Head Start regulations because they provide funding. We're looking at the Vermont early learning guidelines to understand what exactly is intended to be happening in these classrooms. So that's where some of our recommendations for space sizing come from. The other thing I was going to say, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to dominate the conversation, was that there's another piece to this that it bears consideration. We're in a time of unprecedented cost escalation for construction. And right now we're carrying between 8 and 10% cost escalation per year for school construction, actually for any construction. It's largely being driven by a lack of trade workers and the cost of mechanical, electrical, and plumbing trades just going through the roof. I mean, twice what they were 5 years ago. And so the committee and the school board and the community should consider the cost of delayed action as well.
Right.
Because right now, the estimates that we've provided anticipate a construction start in 2024. And right now that would be, I don't think that that's actually feasible anymore because that moment has passed. If some benevolent billionaire were to gift the Danville School Board all the money they needed and you told us to start today designing, we might be able to get in the ground in 2024. But if we have a 6 months or 8 months of campaign, bond vote, then we're talking about 2025. So there is a cost to the community to delay action. And I think that just bears consideration.
Mark, I heard you say something to the effect that we don't have to wait on, I assume, the state. There's
Right.
stuff we can be doing.
Yeah.
So what's the stuff we could be doing? I guess?
Well, the first thing that we can be doing is for this group to make a recommendation to the school board on what you think the path forward ought to be. My understanding of that this group was constituted to gather community input. And to consider that community input and to look at lots of, Cam's been in here 1 or 2 times for this group. I'm coming in tonight to talk about some things. And to make an educated recommendation to the school board. We know that there's 4, hold up the right number of fingers, there's 4 options on the table, starting with do nothing. And then just renovate what you have, or renovate and add a wing, and then the 4th one is to build an entire new building, and there's pros and cons to doing. Well, there's all cons to doing nothing, but there are pros and cons to taking the other approaches. And the school board is asking this group to make a recommendation based on the community input and discussion that you've been having. That work can continue. The other thing is that once that decision is made, when the school board acts, there will be a pause in time during which we are going to have to seriously get into the financing aspects of this and line up financiers. And I'm going to talk about a couple different ways that could might take shape in the next part of my presentation. But just, I don't know, it was written up in the paper as last time the advisory committee considered pumping the brakes, and I don't know if that's something that was said here or if that was a term of art by the reporter, but
I don't think we used the phrase, but I think we talked about, we can't get it when, there was talk at one point of, well, is this gonna be voted on by the public in November? And
oh,
we said,
that's
well, no,
that's
that's-
off the table.
That's
November's
not
gonna
possible,
happen.
right, so that's where some of that, and then the Act 72 conversation came up as, what should we do, what shouldn't we do, we need to find out. And
Right.
so that's where I could see the interpretation being, we said pump the brakes, we never said that, but we realized we couldn't finish the project.
But I think another really important point that Cameron mentioned was none of these options have been actually designed. They do not have actual drawings that you can go with a shovel and start building this tomorrow.
Right.
We have a full design process that will have to take place with any of these options that we choose, even the ones that are most baked. So we do have to build that into the timeline as well, that there will be not just for the architecture of it, but also structural, HVAC,
Electrical
electrical.
design into a bidding process and,
Yeah, it's
security
it's a process.
financing, there's a lot to it.
So when does community approval to a recommendation, where does that fit in the timeline?
Well, I can tell you what the process is going to be, is the board is going to take a vote on an action, and then they will take a vote to bring and then that we're going to have to pause and do some design and engineering work to know what we're actually proposing to be built and how much it's going to cost. And then that will be taken to the community for a quote unquote bond vote with the community to approve the project and the financing of the project. We had optimistically hoped we might get that done by November of this year. That's not going to happen. As Cam just pointed out, it may be difficult to get this all resolved in 2024, but I would just argue that, we can talk about this and talk about it and talk about it. At some point, we need to put something in front of the voters and let the voters decide.
Right.
And I think, you're all Danville residents, I believe. I'm a Danville resident. I'm a taxpayer in Danville too. So I have 2 hats on, that neither which you can see right now, but I have my superintendent's hat on, but I also have a taxpayer hat on. So I've always been looking at this through with both of those hats. But we've been talking about this for a long time, and ultimately it's going to be up to all the voters in the town to decide if this is worth going forward. So I think we keep plowing ahead. And I will be shocked if there's anything that comes out of the facility recommendations from the agency that are gonna make us go, whoops, we didn't design that right.
Yeah, I think some of our main question was around some of that funding. Okay, we know that they have to make the outlay formula. Is that with the expectation that the state is planning to fund that next year with that, or that's just hopes dreams?
I would be a fool to speculate on that, because it's only gonna be a function of whether the state thinks they have money to put into it.
Okay.
Yeah, so they may end up with here are the new standards. Here's how we would spend the money if we ever had it, but we don't have the money, so they're not gonna, I don't know if that's gonna go. I don't know where they think they have money tucked away to do this, but they're doing all their due diligence, I guess, on making sure because it's been 15 years since they've done any state aid to construction, so anybody that knew how to do that back in 2007 is probably left state government by now.
I've got a question. Mark. Have you got a type of design that could be adjusted to fit the site?
A prototype design?
Yeah. I use those up in some large schools.
No, not really. I mean, each design is unique to the site. I mean, we haven't gone out ahead, if that's the question.
Okay, if you have ed specs that are kind of for all the schools, right? Then you may have a structure without the slopes and the site constraints.
Right.
That is a kind of an example of a prototype. You see, and which you could perhaps improve your schedule on the design process. You know, but that's a little bit out there, but
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a missing step in that, you know, if the school board were to say, listen, we really want to go for a new school, we would go through a short concept design phase.
Yeah.
And generate that sort of prototype at a high level.
Yeah.
And it would be, you know, a very, very small portion of the overall design process, but it would be enough to generate a more realistic schedule and budget. Because right now, you know, the option for a new, we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves, I think, though, Mark. Because you haven't even talked about the financing, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe let me get to that, and
Yeah.
I suspect that's
that was just a
gonna
question.
generate even more questions, but.
Yeah.
Not to cut anybody off, but if anybody else has any specific questions about what I presented on Act 72, let's get them out of the way now. You know, my bottom line message is it's never in our best interest to wait for the state of Vermont to make decisions.
Well, I think one other thing to keep in mind, and this is neither here nor there, but it's pertinent. The legislature now is debating, or members of the legislature are debating a totally different funding model for schools, potentially income-based, not even property tax-based. And, you know, so I guess my point in bringing that up is that school funding and school construction aid and all of these things and how the district interfaces with the state and how money flows is so uncertain right now, but I'm drawn back to the reality that the school is not getting younger. And the community needs to try and make plans regardless of what the state decides.
Right.
Because we don't know what they're gonna decide.
Nope.
They don't either. Exactly.
Sometimes they don't know after they've decided. So that's, but anyway, let's not get into that anymore. All right, I'm gonna move on to the next piece of this. So let's talk about how these projects are funded. Okay, so I want to make sure that everybody understands. I don't want people walking out of here with a number in their head, and then when it comes in slightly different, higher or lower, you come back with pitchforks and say you lied to them. Mark Tuckey lied to me on September 28th, 2022. These are hypothetical models. I want you to understand generally how the funding, how the financing for a project like this works. This is very much informed by the work that was done at Winooski, which is weeks away now from wrapping up their 2.5 to 3 year construction project where they renovated their entire school in place. Okay, on the same footprint. They didn't have the luxury of land to build a new school facility. I mean, they basically have a new school facility, but they built it. It was kind of flying the airplane, building the airplane as they were flying it for the last 2.5 years. Cam's very familiar with that project. And it was successful, but all right, so just to kind of wrap your head around this, there's a couple of sources for potential sources for funding. There's a Vermont Bond Bank. There's also a program through USDA that provides funding for things like this. Winooski, when they started off, they initially thought they were going to the Vermont Bond Bank and put together all of their financial plans, thinking that they would go to the bond bank and the bond bank would finance it. And when they got there, the bond bank said, well, it was a $57 million roughly project. And they said, well, that's too big. We can't do that. So there was a period of scrambling. Richard Dean's in the back of the room grinning, right? You get caught up in that. They started scrambling and found out that the USDA also funds these things, and they actually went away from the bond bank and went with USDA funding. I think we are going to approach both of these bodies to see. I think the bond bank, unless they've increased their limits, are going to have an even harder time to fund this project because it's bigger than Winooski. I'm hoping that the USDA, it's a federal government agency. $70 or $77 million is not that much to the federal government, but we will see. Typically, what happens though is that if any of you ever built a new home and gone to bank financing, if you do that, when you go to the bank and they approve you for a mortgage, what they actually have you do is take out a construction loan, okay, while you're building the house. And what they will do is say, okay, I want to build a $200,000 house. And they say, yeah, we will give you a mortgage for it when it's done. But here's a separate construction loan. And we will make periodic payments out of that construction loan to pay your contractor as you're going. And when it's all done, you go back to the bank and say, we're done. And then they execute the mortgage, pay off your construction loan, and then you start paying on it. Okay. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So that's kind of what we're talking about here. Okay. During the period of construction, so in terms of the short-term, what I think of as short-term financing, that's probably going to be handled through a local bank. Okay, and Mike is having some initial conversations with some of the banks around here about doing this. And what they do is during the construction period, we'll take out loans or chunks of money periodically, and I'll show you one illustration of that in a minute. And then what you do during that construction period is you pay interest on the money that you're borrowing. Okay, and that's all. You don't pay any of the principal, you just pay the interest. And then when everything's done, your lender of record, your 30-year lender gives you a check for that amount of money, and you wipe out all of the construction loans, and then you start paying principal and interest over the period of over the 30 years or whatever. Okay, so initially, and you'll see this in the illustration, the initial cost of this are basic until we actually finish a project are only interest payments on the amount that we're borrowing periodically to fund the construction. Okay, and I want to be clear that nobody does these projects on a 20-year note. You can't do it. So I know that got talked about originally. And I heard some people speculating about, oh, it's going to cost, we can't pay it in 20 years. It'll be monumental to pay this off. I'm going to explain how this actually works. Okay, so Mike and I built a hypothetical model. Our starting point is the FY23 approved budget. Okay, so that's like, think of that as a foundation, and tax rates, et cetera, because everything I'm going to tell you about increasing tax rates are based on the FY23 tax rate for Danville, education tax rate for Danville. It's hypothetical, so the assumptions in there, we modeled the capital cost 70 million versus 77 million. Those are the ballparks for the renovate and expand versus the build brand new. We used a conservative interest rate of 4%. We think that's probably high, even in today's, even though everybody's talking about how bad the interest rates are. It's a different animal when you're financing through a bond bank, or, you know, this is not like going to, going to Union Bank and trying to get a home mortgage and they want 7.5% or whatever the market's demanding right now. So, but we still think this is a conservative number, meaning it's a little high, and we would hope to get it down in the, in the somewhere in the 3% range, but that's not a promise, that's a whole. And I already talked about the short-term borrowing cycle during construction. Changes to any of these assumptions up or down are going to make the numbers come out different. Okay, I mean, it just is. And this is a snapshot. I don't have an interactive model, so don't ask me, well, what would it look like if the new building actually cost $85 million, or what would it, I can't do that here. Okay, I don't have that superpower. Mike's got it on his computer in the office, but I don't have that. Okay, all right. So let's talk about how Danville School District education is funded today. Okay, forget the construction for a second. Under the current funding model, and Cam's right, there is some early discussion about changing, moving away from a property tax, getting, for providing funds to the ed fund, and then, some other sorts like, increasing sales tax, maybe going to income-based contributions, whatever. I don't know what they're going to do. I'm not going to make myself crazy about what they're going to do. Fundamentally, though, I don't think that if they change the funding source, I don't think they're going to necessarily change the distribution model or method. So right now, Danville is a receiving town, and that's there are receiving towns and sending towns in the ed funding structure today. Danville's a receiving town. Back when Act 60 was first passed, there was all this discussion about gold towns. So they were talking about Stowe and Stratton and Killington and places like that, who had overcapacity to raise taxes to pay for things that they want because of the value of their homes. Okay. So some of those towns, Woodstock, where Mike used to work down in that district, that's a sending district, which means that they actually have to raise more money than they need to pay their own education costs. And the difference is sent into the education fund, and it's given out to towns like Danville, which does not have the taxing capacity to raise enough money locally to pay its education costs. Okay, I'll let that sink in a little bit. The point is that we are not paying for 100% of the education costs in Danville in our education property taxes as residential taxpayers. We just don't. What Danville raises, and this is in FY23, and this number fluctuates a little bit, but in FY23, the local residential taxes, and that's for me and anybody else in here that owns a home in Danville, the residential property taxes only contribute about 32% of the total Danville school district budget. Okay, and that's important to keep in mind. Another 35% comes from non-residential property taxes. That's the camps on Joe's Pond and, businesses. I guess, I would lump Marty's store in there. He must be paying commercial property taxes or non-residential taxes. A few other businesses around town, so they pay at a different rate. The remaining 33% comes directly out of the education fund. As I said before, there are wealthier towns in Vermont that contribute more than they need to spend for their education, and then that money gets distributed to the other communities that are considered identified as receiving towns. The money that goes into the state education fund, that money comes from 100% of the sales and use tax. Okay. Purchase and use tax, meals and rooms tax, and the proceeds from the Vermont lottery. So those are all lumped together. One of the reasons that Vermont, that our district school taxes have actually continued to go down in Danville is because the sales tax revenues were so much higher than anticipated because of the pandemic and all of everybody went to shopping online, and the Vermont finally got around to assessing sales tax against Amazon and all the big retail online retailers. And the one got flooded with money, all of which was designated by statute to go into the ed fund. So we've been running, like last year, they have a $90 million surplus in the ed fund that they fought over in the legislature. So I don't know how much longer that's going to continue, but anyway, that's where that other 33% comes from. Okay. So because of that, when you talk about financing this construction project in whatever form it takes, the impact on the residential taxpayers is not 100% of the impact. Okay, you're only, if it were today, if it were in 1923 terms, the 1920 FY23 terms, in 1923 terms,
Like I said,
we'd have a barn raising party. In FY23 terms, only about 32% of the actual cost, the construction costs are going to be assessed to the residential taxpayers. And then, 35% to the non-residential and 33% is going to come in from the other sources. Okay. So that's important to keep in mind because it influences or impacts what we see on a tax impact.
And that breakdown is because the payouts are just it's the loan payback is hitting the budget, the fiscal year budget, right? As opposed to having it be a separate sort of line item. It's just a part of our normal.
It's factored into our education spending.
Okay,
It does not affect ed spending per equalized pupil, which would put us into a penalty situation.
Gotcha.
But it does factor into education spending. Okay.
So is it fair to say that? Say. There's a bond to build or whatever, renovate, whatever. Does essentially, should the taxpayers think about it in the sense that we get it from property taxes, residential ones and non-residential ones, we essentially pay 2/3 of those costs.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah, from residential and non-residential property taxes together. I don't mean to, it's a little weird to talk about this because we're in a situation where the residential taxpayers are the ones that are going to make this decision, but it impacts the non-residential taxpayers in town who don't have a vote. They don't get to vote on this. But that's just the way this funding works. Okay, so there's yeah, that's just the way it works. But this is nothing new. It's been like this every year. And we talk about it in our budget presentations. We started talking about it since I came on board in our budget presentations, and maybe it used to be addressed before, I don't know. But at least starting in 2020, when we were talking about the FY, my first year, my first budget cycle with this district, we talked about here are the shares and how the education costs are distributed amongst the different taxpayers and funding sources. Okay. So here's some borrowing assumptions, and I put these side by side. And again, this is just, the ballpark estimates. A $70 million renovation with a new wing, or the $77 million entire new building. Okay. So because we were building off the FY23 budget, we started our assumption in FY24. As Cam said, whether we can start in FY24 is a whole nother question. But all that this does to this model is push it out a year. Okay. Essentially, there's not going to be any substantial change to this model, significant change to the model if we start a year later. But so let me stick with this model here because I can explain this one. So in FY24, the end of 23 and FY24, we think the estimated borrowing will be pretty minimal. We might borrow money to pay Truex to do their design work. We're going to have to look at that. We might have money in our capital reserve to do that. We haven't figured out. They haven't told us yet what they're going to charge us. We haven't had that conversation. So we're going to have to fund that first. So we might decide we have to or want to go to the bank and borrow money to complete the design phase, or we might pay for it out of money that we already have. And it may be an amount that is manageable, and we go to the taxpayers and say, give us 2 more cents on the tax rate and we can pay for the design fee. I don't know how that's going to work out. We're going to figure that out. Okay. But somehow, but at least in the beginning, we think the borrowing is gonna be minimal. Okay? And then, starting in, FY 25, and this is a guess, so I don't know. We're looking at maybe borrowing 35 million in that year, another 20 the following year, and 15 million to wrap it up, in FY 27. Those ratios are gonna vary, I don't know, and I didn't check this with Cam, he might tell me, no, you gotta back end load it instead of front end load it, I don't know. I had to do something, so this is, who knows?
Construction manager would give us an even better sense.
Right, so we're gonna figure that out, so this, that's, I almost put in here, your mileage may vary depending on what the real experience is, but this is directionally correct, as Mike likes to say, okay? The borrowing for a $77 million entire new building is the only thing that really changed in here was the middle borrowing part at 25 million instead of 20 in FY 26. Okay, but again, as I said before, this is money that we will pay interest on it until we finish the project and execute a final financing. Okay, and all of these scenarios assume a 30-year bond at 4% interest. Hopefully, it won't be higher, it could be less. We'll see. Okay. In terms of the impact on the budget, okay, so this is where, and this is important. This tracks back to the numbers on the previous slide, and what we're saying here is let's just talk about the $70 million one, just for illustration purposes, not because I think that's a better one or not. So we think that the increase in the debt service, and that's a term of art from the accounting world, the debt service in FY 24 would be minimal. If we borrow that money in FY 25, we're looking at a debt service of $1.4 million. And that's based on that 4%. So we're going to pay interest. That's going to cost us money, carrying cost for that. 2.2 million in FY 26, 2.8 million in FY 27, and 3.9 million. Okay, and then we're done. And then our projection is then we execute the whole loan. And then what we're looking at starting in FY 28 through 57. Okay, I don't expect to be here for the deed burning or the loan burning, but some of you might do that. Is the increase in debt service is going to be 3.9 million, but the difference being that at that point we're paying principal and interest at 4%. Does that make sense? Okay.
Thomas will be there.
Thomas will be there, yeah. So we're going to designate you the official burner of the loan paper.
Once we paid it off, we don't do it for that.
Thing I want to point out to you here is if you compare the two projects and the potential cost of the two projects, the incremental difference between the two is not that great. It's not, it's $7 million more, but the incremental cost for doing this, like in FY 25, we think that debt service is going to be about the same. It might be another 200,000 in FY 26 and another 500,000 in FY 27. And then when you get to the end, it's only 500,000 more per year in debt service to have a brand new building. Okay.
So one option was, it was like renovate, upgrade the infrastructure for this plant, right? That was 30 million.
30 or 32, yeah.
Right, and then, or that plus add addition
Right, that's the
Or-
70 million.
for the 77.
Right,
The
the
whole
building.
thing.
Well, yeah, and we'll talk about options in just a bit, but I would hold on that, don't have that 30 million number in your head. Because that also did not include design costs, all the contingencies, et cetera. Those were extra line items on that sheet. So that was just the core construction cost. There's other costs that go into that, so it will be more than 30 million, but I want to hold on options until we go through these options here after talking about that.
So the one thing I would say about the renovate only option is if that's what the board and the community decide to do, I'll be a disappointed taxpayer. Because I think what we'll end up with is a 1936 Chevy that's had all the rust removed, and it's still a 1936 Chevy. And so I'm not, you know, I don't,
You ever see what
I
an
didn't even
airbag-
bother to model that because I don't think that, I'm hoping that we're not.
You ever see what an airbag looks like when you try and mount it to a 1932 Chevy steering wheel?
Right, right. It's not gonna work. It's just not gonna work. But anyway, we'll see. Okay. Let me move on. So there's a big question, and this is what freaked everybody out when we first started talking about this, because I heard people say, my property taxes are gonna go up $3,000 if we do this project, okay? That's not what's gonna happen, okay? That is not what happens, and this doesn't happen for all the reasons that I already explained about how ed funding works and the share that the residential taxpayers actually pay. So what this reflects here is a minimal change to the resident. This is changes over and above whatever the tax rate is, okay? So every year we pass a budget and we tell the community that based on factors like the yield rate and the common level of appraisal, and a couple other things that the state gives, and the number of equalized peoples, we need to set a tax rate at X to raise our share of that money here in Danville, you know, our 32% share of that money here in Danville. Okay. The residential tax rates in Danville, when I first came on board, were pushing $1.70. We're down at $1.54 now because of a number of things that have worked in our favor in this community that have a positive impact on the tax rate in the sense of, I mean, lowering the overall tax, the education property tax rate. Okay, the yield has been high or equal. We continue to increase the number of students enrolled, and that raises our equalized pupil count, so that tends to push down the tax rate and things like that. We talk about that every February, late February before town meeting, okay, and illustrate that. So on this $70 million renovation, in terms of the residential taxpayers, we're looking at, you know, projecting on this model 11 additional cents in FY25. These numbers are not cumulative, so don't go over to the right-hand side and like add these numbers up, okay? That's not how this works here. So let me give you this example. I think this will help to understand. I'm gonna use myself, okay, because I'm a Danville taxpayer. I live in a home that's currently valued rounded to $200,000, okay? Under this proposal, in the first year, this is per $100,000 of home value. So I would take this $109 in FY25 and multiply it by 2. So in FY25, in this projection, I would be, as a individual residential taxpayer who's not income sensitive, I would be looking at a $218 increase in my education property tax over whatever the tax rate is for the rest of the budget. Okay, we still have to fund the school. It's not that the tax rates are going to go down to 11 cents. This is over and above what we need to raise to pay to operate the school that we have today. Okay, and then in FY26, I'm going to pay a little bit more. At the end of this project, the impact to me as a residential taxpayer in a $200,000 home is $604 over what, you know, that's what my share, that's what my contribution is going to be as a residential taxpayer with a $200,000 home at the end of this project. $600 additional dollars per year that I will be paying into the town to pay for this project.
So $50 a month.
$50 a month, right? $50 a month, yeah.
And that doesn't figure out any increase in wages or benefits or something like that.
That's a
That's
totally
all
separate.
straight.
This is over and above what, we're gonna keep putting
This
out
project,
budgets every year to operate the school.
Right,
And
so
we're
I
gonna
don't want people to think that's my budget, we're only gonna go up $218. And that's it. They have to realize that the 218 is for the FY25 portion.
Over and above what we have to raise to fund the school.
Thank you.
And, you know, I feel pretty good in saying that I think we do a good job here in Danville at being respectful of all the taxpayers and what we ask the town to, you know, the taxpayers to contribute. You know, we benefit here in Danville from, you know, a robust enrollment of high school students from other communities that have high school choice. And that's, you know, to the tune of a couple $100,000 a year that just comes in as revenue to us, so we don't have to raise off at the school. And as long as I'm around, we're gonna continue to be fiscally conservative with the operation of the school and the other 7 schools in the SU. You know,
and if you have an energy design that is really. But a good, strong design, robust, you know, then your operating costs will also go.
our operating costs will go down, right?
Well, they might go down per square foot. If you build a lot more square footage, I mean, a couple things to keep in mind. All of the plans that we're talking about, they actually don't increase the number of teachers. Right, because we don't anticipate, we anticipate that there will be some additional capacity in the school after it's all built out. But we don't contemplate the school population increasing dramatically to the point where you're hiring new teachers. If you needed to hire a new teacher down the road, you could, and there'd be space for them. But any design that we would do would use fundamentally different materials. You know, we wouldn't be using this traditional kind of carpet. We wouldn't use the tile that you see in the hallway, which requires stripping and waxing. So you probably would be able to have a slightly larger school with the same number of custodians. If it gets much larger, you know, you might have an added custodian. But yeah, the energy costs are much more easily addressed after renovation. Because the envelope here is the portions of the school that are uninsulated. And your heating, a good portion of your heating needs are coming from propane right now, which is the most expensive fuel.
Yeah, that's actually changed though since the wood chip plant was brought back. on.
Oh, that's, you gotta.
Yeah,
okay,
but
so-
that was true. There
sorry,
was
it's
a
been
point in
it's been a
time when
while.
that was true. But now the wood chip plant is running, but wood chip, that's not getting cheaper. The cost of wood chips is going up significantly. So anyway. So yes, Dave, your point is well taken. This is on top of what we need to raise to continue to operate the school that we have until we have a fully renovated or new school building to move into.
Yeah.
Okay.
And some costs will go up and some will go down when you do that.
Do we have a credible projection of student enrollment over time?
Not, so we used to have somebody on the board that did that for us. We had a board member that liked to play with that kind of stuff. Put him on the spot, but it's.
We have many times.
Huh?
We've put him on the spot a few times.
Oh, you have?
Yeah,
So his dad was on.
It's on tape, so you have it.
He even studies on the birth rates of the area, and so it was incredible work.
Yeah.
The enrollment continues to climb slightly, not dramatically, but slightly in the school district. Which is not the experience that I see in the other 6 schools that I serve, and it's generally not the trend in. You know, around the state. There are there's things that can happen that have nothing to do with the school project that could really help Danville. Like if somebody would build some affordable housing in this community. And I'm not talking about Section 8 housing, but a good, well-planned, nice. Affordable housing project, we would attract more families to live in Danville, and that those families bring their kids, and those kids help our tax rate, but I'm not taking that on. That's somebody else. I'll talk to anybody that wants to talk about it in another setting, but
Planning commission would be interested in that.
the planning committee, yeah, so maybe one of these days I'll get in front of the planning committee.
It's a
I mean,
great question, though. There are professional demographers. And oftentimes, school districts will hire a professional demographer to do a study. So I know they did that in Champlain Valley School District. They discovered that in Williston, they're gonna be adding 100 kids in K-2. You know, over the next 10 years,
Yeah.
or that's the projection.
Williston's a sending town, and they'll just go out and build another school. I mean, that's a reality. We're in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont, and nobody thinks that they can do these projects out here. You know, Williston can do it, and some of the, anyway.
But I do think we need some kind of documented, credible projection of student enrollment. I mean, that's like a basic
Mhm.
assumption about that sort of drives the whole thing.
Sure.
Yeah, Mary had a,
No, I just had a quick question. Is it possible to get a printout or you email us this information?
Yeah, I'm gonna give this to you to post.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, they'll give me the
Yeah, it'll be
slides.
posted
Okay,
on
perfect.
the advisory group webpage. That's linked to the Danville school site.
Yeah, it's up
Absolutely.
and running. Good, I
Okay.
figured you. Okay.
So the other thing here is just to point out again, is that the incremental difference, the incremental tax impact difference. Between renovating or building a new building, you know, starting in FY 28 in this model. Is only $31 a year. Additional cost, so, you know, this. Anyway, I think I made my point about the incremental differences.
great.
Okay, last thing I want to touch on here, there's this little thing called income sensitivity, which is, Mike and I spent some time today trying to untangle the formula that the state uses. I can't explain the formula and how it actually works.
Nobody can.
Yeah, good luck.
The costs arising from this construction project will have some impact on those who are eligible for paying their education tax. Based on income sensitivity, and that's because one of the factors that goes into the calculation is education spending. What I can't tell you is exactly how that's going to work, but today, and we talk about this every February going into town meeting. In FY 23, the income sensitive tax rate for somebody who qualified, it's on a sliding scale, so it's calculated based on your income and the homestead value of your property as a resident of Danville. So those two numbers go into this formula, but somebody who qualifies, whose home is at a low enough value and their income is at a low enough value, and I'm not talking about low, I'm talking about, I think the cap is like $90,000 of income, of household income, and it might be, you know, it's several $100,000 in home property. But when that calculation is done, we have taxpayers in this town that are only paying a straight 2.35% of their income for property taxes, and what they're paying, you know, somebody can do it real quick. What's 2.35% of $80,000? I don't, you know, whatever that is. If you had $80,000 in income and you qualified for the 2.3% rate, and Richard, I think he's doing that for me. Are you doing that or no? You answered it.
$1,600.
Okay, anyway, so it's something like $400, right? It's in the $400 range.
2.35%. That's 1880.
$1,800 compared to, you know, I think my education tax rate, because I'm not income sensitive, is like around 3,500 this year. So,
80,000.
it's just an interesting aside. We do talk about this every year at budget, you know, budget presentation time.
It means those numbers that you presented, the $333 per $100,000 of home value only applies to earners over, I think it might be, I think it's 115 actually.
Whatever it is, this assumes no income sensitivity.
Yeah,
This
that's
is
the only
great.
thing. So it's less for people who are income.
It's
sensitive.
less. I just can't tell you how much less. I wanted to have a couple of examples, and Mike and I just realized, okay, this is, you know, 3 hours of our life we'll never get back after trying to, you know, debug that formula. So.
So this is fantastic stuff. Is this the end of that? All right. I wanted to make sure that we gave Cam some time as well to walk us through some of these options, some of the pros, cons, and potential things that compromises you may have made in some of that.
Can we just finish up on the income? I don't know if I wanted to say something.
I just want to point out that income sensitivity is a huge tax shift. But it really is, and I personally, I think they should throw it out, but. It just complicates everything, and there's some people in this town. I see the list that get income sensitivity that. I don't know why. But they do.
So I'm not gonna try to defend the practice. It was originally instituted because there were people on fixed incomes in houses that continue to increase in value. And they said, if your income is not increasing in proportion to the value of your home because of the real estate market. And I know I'm looking right at the lister and saying this, that's why I think that what the genesis of that was. I don't remember, I don't know, I never knew when that was instituted. It may have outlived its intended purpose, like a lot of things that are in tax law.
I bet it doesn't go away.
It's a statewide thing.
It's a
right?
statewide
so
thing,
we're
yeah,
not-
I don't know. And you're right, I mean, to the extent that anybody, in this hypothetical that somebody's paying $1,800 less because they're income sensitive, that money's coming from somewhere else. Coming out of the ed fund, and I think it's coming from, the sending towns that have to raise just that much more money to cover the income sensitive people in the other communities in the state of Vermont. I will never sit here and tell you that the paying for education with the property tax is the right way to do it. I don't think that's.
So I disagree with that. How else would you do it?
Well, that's,
I would-
Hey, just one other thing, and if I butcher this. Come to my help, Yeah, sure. I'm talking to Tim. If the values of property going up in Danville are such that at some point we might hit a reappraisal of the entire town sooner than what people might think. Is that accurate?
Sure is.
Okay, and what that might end up doing is because a lot of the increase is in the properties around Joe's Pond. Those non-resident taxpayers could be hit with a greater portion of the percentage of paying for this, because it would be a distribution of the property tax. Am I accurate on that?
I think you can't, there's a limit to what you can push over onto, because they have no vote, but there's some, I think.
I don't know anything about that. I'm
I
just
think
talking.
there's a mechanism that you can't just put the burden all over
Okay,
onto them.
Yeah, there are some braking systems built into it.
okay.
I don't understand how that works.
Okay, well, that's all I wanted to say on that. And the final thing is, in a previous life, a number of years ago, I was the delinquent tax collector for the town of Danville.
Okay,
So I saw the struggle for people paying taxes. And for you or for me or other people in this room, $50 to $60 a month may not be a lot.
right.
But it will push some people into delinquent taxes that are probably struggling and paying them now. And if you had a $200,000 home, you're looking at $600 more a month.
A
No,
year.
$600 a year.
Thank
Oh,
you.
right, I could be voting no.
And if it's 250, if I'm 250, I'm gonna be looking at, $750.
Right, at
Okay,
the end of the process.
all I'm pointing out is that this will have an effect on some people.
Absolutely. Mhm.
So.
All right. No, I mean, the point's well taken, and that's why, if this was easy, we would have just done it.
No, I know, I
Yeah.
understand.
And some people are gonna vote no just for that reason.
That's right,
Yeah, and we expect that.
okay.
This is
Thank
not an easy. One
If
more
I
thing.
understand this correctly, the town of Danville would have to borrow $70 million. They'd have to bond for $70 million.
If we did the renovate it, yeah, on the one.
77, whatever it is.
Right.
That payment is $4 million a year, no matter where the money comes from. It's $4 million.
Principal and
a
interest,
year.
once we're
The
paying.
town of Danville is responsible for that.
Right.
And if the state of Vermont changes their funding, you're gonna be screwed.
You mean if they change ed financing model and et cetera, I don't know. I don't think that they are going to fundamentally change the distribution model because look, it took 2 years to get them to look at the weighting recommendations, but yeah, I know that's a tricky thing about this because there's a lot of things that could happen out there in the world.
In
The other
30
thing that
years.
could happen is that the federal government could decide that they're going to provide money to the states to support school construction and renovation. And we could get a gift from the state of Vermont of several $1,000,000 and we would just apply that to the total cost. And reduce, reduce what the Danville taxpayers have to pay.
That happened to Winooski. They got a big windfall, and they're actually borrowing less than they voted to bond for.
Yeah.
Because they got a windfall from the feds, and they got a windfall from the state.
Right. I think they started out at 57 and they're only executing at around 54.
Something like that,
Something
yeah.
like that.
I think, the only certainty though, is that it probably won't be the same through 1957, or, I'm sorry, 2057. You know, so they're, I think,
Something will change.
and the context for this, I guess I just wanna, reiterate for people that the context for Danville is that right now, the state as a whole has a FCI for all the school buildings throughout the state of around 72%. And we calculate that at a value of roughly $7 to $11 billion worth of, yeah, I mean, these are ridiculous numbers. So this is the next 10 years in the state. This is gonna happen throughout every community. Because all of these schools were built in the 50s and 60s.
With the baby
All of them
boom.
were renovated in the 80s and 90s. Most of them have not been worked on in 15 to 30 years because there's been no state education funding. Or state construction aid rather.
Mhm.
So the context of this is that Danville's not alone. And something is gonna have to change. We don't know what. But that to I'm not sure what impact that has on people's urgency.
One other quick question on that, saying that, this is all it sort of reached its life expectancy. In 30 years, say you went with a new building, does that mean they're gonna be facing what we're facing right now?
That's a good segue. That's a good segue. I would say that buildings, main infrastructure for buildings is gonna have a life expectancy of around 50 years or so. So that's copper, cast iron, electrical wiring, building structure, etc. Some equipment and finishes may even have less lifespan than 25 years, but most equipment is gonna have a lifespan of 20 to 25 years. So you generally are gonna be renovating a building like this every 25 years, and every 50 years, you're gonna be considering the cost of replacement based on how adaptable the structure is. Because every 50 years or so, you're gonna have to do a complete infrastructure refit, which means pulling out all the cabling, pulling out all the piping, basically gutting it back to bare structure and then rebuilding it. So it's kind of a 25 and 50-year cycle. Which is,
So
that's
then they would be looking
so
at
yeah.
the same situation
Yes.
we are. Is what-
similar.
Well, not probably even worse.
Well, it'll be 25 years of higher costs.
But you may get a change in the flexibility of the design of the classrooms in the ed specs.
Sure.
We've got our old model here of, the lecturing instruction, where you're all stacked in rows. And that was very fixed. And we have a reasonably flexible design of spaces.
And a lot depends on the quality that you decide to build. If you spend less upfront, then you're probably spending less by building with lesser quality materials, and they won't last as long. You can put terrazzo in the corridors, and it costs, I don't know, 10 times as much as the cheapest flooring, but it lasts 50 years. I mean, it's still the original terrazzo is still sitting in the UN building. You know what I mean? So how much you spend up front has an impact on how long things last and how durable they are and the overall operational cost over time. Yeah, so we have to balance that out. That's kind
I
of,
guess there's no way that you can there's no way you can provide over a period of time that you would be setting up reserves for these kind of major repairs. So that you don't get into I guess sort of got the impression there's a lot of deferred maintenance is the problem here.
Great.
The
And
32 district has done that. They've done a really good job,
I mean,
actually.
is that anything that's been looked at, is built in, because that would also affect the taxes, right?
Well, that's
So
and that's.
I can address that a little bit. So, we have to have a 5 and 10 year capital improvement plan for the schools. We're required to do that under, I don't think it was 72, it's a different act. So that's something that is work that's going on right now. Of course, in Danville's case, we're looking at things that we may not have to actually do, because if this building project goes forward, we wouldn't be doing some of those capital investments, because those are gonna be focused on what do we have today and what do we have to do to keep them running. But for all of the schools in CCSU, we will have a capital improvement plan. And that's just, not something that honestly that's ever really been done. I've never found one anywhere here, but it's something that we're working on right now.
Tim, I heard you say that. Say we took on this debt and then I understood you to say that if the state changed its funding algorithm, we might be screwed, right? So.
The town's gonna be on the hook.
This, I mean,
Yeah,
this
I'm
is
just trying to wrap I'm just trying to wrap my head around what that really means. Like, what would be a scenario? What would the state do that would leave us up a creek? I mean, I don't really understand it.
I mean, if they completely changed the ed funding and stuff and made it all residential property taxes, for example, that would do it. But I mean, like that would never be politically tenable, right? So like you,
That's,
yeah, it's getting into way too many weeds, I think.
All right.
Yeah.
Like,
But 30 years.
yeah, I mean, it's 30 years. What could the state legislature do?
What could go wrong, right?
Yeah, like, I mean,
so my horizon on that question is like a year. What could they possibly do in the next session that's gonna make things worse for us? But it's a point well taken. I mean, I just don't have any way to,
Deal with it.
I don't have any way to deal with that. And the fact of the matter is, we can sit here and do nothing, and then there are major systems in this building that are gonna fail. And then we're gonna be going to the voters and saying, we need $2 million to put a new electrical system in.
yeah, so that's actually leads me into one of the questions.
Yeah.
Dave, I'm sorry.
So the building a brand new school project, that includes a deconstruction of the current facility.
Yeah,
Can we use that as the segue? Great question, and we have a few options. Perhaps this is the time to, like Pam.
I didn't hear what you just said.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So,
Tearing it out, tearing this building down.
okay. I introduced it. Why don't you
Can we hear about the
make it sound better,
projects and-
Cam?
Yeah, so I mean, to jump to it, the new build. Is one of the biggest pros of building a new building is that it simplifies the sequence. For all the occupants, for all the people who are affected by the school, all the students, families. Because what happens is they'll, the school figures out, negotiates a new soccer field. Or schedules games only at the soccer field downtown Verod. I know, I'm sorry. I know, it is a serious concern, but.
Yeah.
Little league.
Then the contractor mobilizes, takes over the field, they build the building, they build it as fast as they can. And then when the building's done, the students basically, they time it so the students go home one summer. And when they come back in the fall, they go into the new building. And then you spend the next several months bulldozing this one and refitting this area for a new replacement soccer field.
Bulldozing this one, except there's no intention to take down the 1936 building.
That's right.
That's
The issue was going to,
That's a historically preserved building, and we're not going there. So
Well, question on that, because that was one of my things. I figured it was a historical building. And you're talking about, you said at the one meeting I went before, that you're talking about renovating that building. And hopefully renting it to CCSU or whatever. Is that?
that's not a commitment. I mean,
No, I'm not, but when I look at that
But
building,
we should be able to find a way to get income out of it.
but
Yeah.
you're
Wouldn't you
looking,
think?
this building has, from what I read, no insulation exterior wall, maybe 6 inches on the roof. Original windows, original distribution panels for wiring, et cetera, significant water penetration on exterior walls and chimney. The 1937 roof is not up to code. And so you'd have to bring it to code. And then I read that their structural clay tie wall system is antiquated and may be lacking in shear resistance strength.
There's a lot of problems. with it.
So
Yeah.
why would you, to rebuild that building? You're gonna have to spend millions.
We might not do that. That was just a
You're better
sentiment.
off Just boarding that thing up.
Well,
and not doing anything,
I don't know about that,
because
but I don't know about
Get
boarding,
the income out.
I don't know about boarding it up. Look,
Get the income though, to pay for the building.
That was John Blackmore speaking.
Sorry,
look, that's not, that was something somebody threw out in discussion several board meetings ago. What about the historic building? You know, when we first started talking about building a new school building, and we said, well, maybe we wouldn't tear that one down, but the other pieces. I don't know if that's gonna be the right. thing.
It doesn't, I don't know if you can tear down a historical building, because I figured that's where you're coming from.
That's
But
what,
on an economic basis,
Is it been
But
designated?
yeah, so to be clear, the building is not on the historic register right now in Vermont. It's eligible for listing on the historic register. I don't believe it's eligible. It may be eligible for registration on the National Historic Register, but I don't believe it's a significant enough building. It's mostly intact. It's been added onto in the back.
Yeah.
My experience with the state is that there's a coin toss likelihood that they come in and say, well, it's a historic asset. Now, that doesn't really necessarily mean anything. I mean, St. Michael's College had a really beautiful old building called Founders Hall that was historic. It was on the register, and they ended up tearing it down
Yeah.
because the economics of it didn't work. They could not make it function for what they needed. So, you know, you can tear down buildings that are on the historic register. This one's not listed. But anytime you go near one of these buildings, you have to alert the state, and the state will come in and make, and the State Department of Historic Preservation will make a determination about whether or not it's a historic asset.
so you were the firm that wrote this, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So everything you wrote about the 1937 building indicated to me that if you're gonna, and then when I heard it saved, there's no reason to save that building from an
There may not
economic standpoint.
you know,
That's probably true.
Yeah,
And
I
you
mean,
got-
it's true, because it's gonna cost you, you're gonna have to do everything in that building that you don't wanna do in this building. And yeah, you'll be able to renovate it with no kids in there, which will help, but it makes no sense keeping that building. That was the only comment I wanted to make.
Okay.
And
I'll
you've
be
got
done.
a precedent with the old school
Builders Academy.
that was demolished for this school.
Yeah.
I
And,
don't disagree with your assessment. I think just so everyone is clear.
I'm done, that was the.
The reason that it was shown on the diagram that was presented as being preserved is because oftentimes in communities like this, that can be a third rail demolishing, you know, and that particular building sits as kind of part of what I would consider the gateway to the town coming up Route 2.
Yeah.
Yep.
You know, it kind of announces your arrival in the village.
Yep.
And I think that plays into it a little bit. So it was a little bit of a political guessing game. And, you know, I guess I've kind of.
Similar to school in that building.
Yeah, I made
You talked to me about it.
I made the executive decision to indicate that it would not necessarily be demolished with the rest of the school.
But it would not economically work to keep it. The town would be
Probably
paying
not.
more money.
Potentially.
And the burden to the taxpayer potentially would be more. And renting it as office space does not seem to me, and you're gonna get enough money out of renting it as office space with rates for office space hypothetically.
Yeah, someone's got to
That's
do it.
gonna justify, plus you have to keep the building maintained and operated and stuff.
Someone
And I-
has to do a pro forma.
Yeah, I think that's a really big discussion. If we come to option 3 is our best option, what do we do with the original building
Yeah, I
is,
just,
is.
I. and
You,
I'm
you,
not-
you bring up, no, you bring up great points. It's, I mean, yeah, you look at that report and
It
it's,
makes sense.
it's pretty damning. yeah.
John said, you're gonna save a building that was built in 1938, you tear everything down, you're built since.
Yes.
That just.
And to be fair, a lot of times these decisions are not driven by the economics, they're driven by nostalgia.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And so politically, I can't make that decision for the community.
that's fair. So, I guess why don't we start, Kim, with the original, design that you did and explain, a little bit about the intent for that, and what we're giving up to have the addition, and what, you had a breakdown of the costs here, like the 32 million for the facilities. There's also 4 other line items that are under that, which are cost escalation, soft costs, owner contingency, and hazmat allowance. I assume all those still apply if we don't do an addition and just do a renovation, but it'd be great to hear a little bit about that option, and how those costs were sort of arrived at and what that was for.
Yeah, so basically what we do is we take the facility report. And the facility report that you folks have all read, that goes to a cost estimator along with the existing drawings of the building so they can quantify things. And they look and they say, all right, so in our report, we say, I'll make an example, replace the windows. The professional cost estimator counts up all the windows, sizes them, and then prices out the cost to replace those windows. Right, so all of those items and recommendations in the report become a line item in a cost estimate, and the line items are all stacked up. We also do prioritize the items, but that's another level of investigation. What those numbers represent is kind of all in soup to nuts. We're gonna fix every problem that's in the building. And we're also gonna address any incidental costs that are associated with that. For instance, when you replace the domestic plumbing system, which in this building has leaded solder and it's old. When you replace the plumbing system, it's above the ceilings, and these ceilings, they don't come out and go back in. They're basically disposable, right? You pull them out, they're trash. Experience in these schools, and I think I've seen it here, is that like the data network, for instance, that runs all the ports, it's just laying on top of the ceiling, right? That's gonna fall down. The first time an inspector comes through during construction, if you try to leave it in place, which I have seen, I've been on those projects, the inspector comes through and says, tie it up, make it neat, or you're gonna pull it out. And half the time, they're able to kind of make it neat and go away, and half the time it just ends up getting trashed. So, and things like lighting, is gonna come out and be replaced anyway. So you end up having to tear out a lot of the building in order to get at the things that need to be replaced because they're buried. This building doesn't have sprinklers, but it needs them. So all of those things, all of those needs are contemplated in those numbers.
Okay.
I will say that facility evaluation number is intended to answer it's only intended to answer, not intended as an option, because it's not apples to apples,
Mhm.
right? The renovation with the addition is more or less apples to apples with option 2, which is a slightly smaller addition and more of the existing building being reused. And option 3 is also apples to apples in that they all contain the same program space, right?
Right.
With the exception of, I think, we converted in option 2, we converted to, instead of 2 gyms and a separate cafeteria, one of them is a gym and a cafeteria. So that was space savings. So
Yeah.
that $32.3 million number there, including some of the other cost
Trying
escalations,
to go
soft
down this
costs,
thing now.
contingencies, and hazmat. That number is really only intended to answer the question. Because what happens is, we do these designs, we show up, we say, hey, we're gonna put an addition over here. And it's gonna be, this many millions, and someone in the community always says, wait, time out. You're talking about all this stuff, these additions, all these needs, what does it take just to fix what we have? That's what that number is. Just to fix what you have, you're gonna pay
I'm gonna get to the slide. there.
trade contractors $33.3 million, plus you're gonna have other costs associated with hazmat, design,
your own contingency, et cetera.
And since we're at the end of our useful life, essentially on almost everything in here, we can expect to pay that regardless of what we do in the next 5 years. But,
5 to 10, I mean, I think what happens is,
okay,
you pay more if you try to piecemeal it.
Okay.
Because there's actually efficiency in getting a contractor to mobilize and do it all at once.
Mhm.
It's very disruptive. to do
Yeah.
that. But it's actually very disruptive to do it piecemeal.
Mm.
Because if you did $3 million of work a year for the next 10 years to get caught up, you'd have people in here nonstop.
Mhm.
You know, and you're talking like, I'm just making a guess, but you're talking like 20 workers.
Right.
You know, to do that much work over that period of time, so it'd be very disruptive.
Yeah, I guess my point really was just that like the do nothing option is actually do a lot of small things for a very long time. And paying
Those
for it
things
at a
fail.
premium price.
Well,
Yeah,
it comes with risks.
right.
When we were, while we were working on the design of the Winooski school, they had a main break, just one leak. Basically in the system, and it was like $150,000 to fix on an emergency basis. And they were shut down for a day and a half.
Mhm.
At CBU, they had the main breaker was just like this and put in the 60s. And it was not exercised. And the main breaker failed. And they couldn't turn it back on. They had to close school and had to literally order it off Craigslist. And luckily they had a master electrician on staff who put it in. They were only. But those things will happen with increasing regularity, the longer and longer you go.
Question. The structural report indicated that many of the conditions that are in the school are a result of possible failures of the roofing systems.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Okay. And recommended various roofs should be inspected and repaired. It sounded like you guys were here in February 2020, snow all over the place. Have you ever come back and looked at the roofs?
Yes,
Okay, what did you find?
they're old. What happens is you see evidence of the age in what we call tenting at corners. Because what happens is these roofs are made of basically plastic. And over time, the plastic gets brittle and it shrinks. And it actually sucks away from all the corners and you see wrinkles appear and seams. And you see fasteners start to show.
Okay.
Where, you know, so there are the evidence of age is not always leaks, although it sometimes is, and there's some water damage around various places. Although if you see leaks, if you see like brown stains on the ceiling tile, just for what it's worth, it's usually not a roof leak. That's usually like condensation on piping or something like that. But yeah, the roof here is it's over 20 years old. It probably has a 20 to 25 year lifespan. Single ply membrane roofs are not intended to last more than 30 years. That's the absolute outside limit of a membrane roof. And those failures will start to accelerate noticeably at some point because the material itself breaks down.
Yep.
And
Have you ever gone with an Irma roof and inverted roof?
inverted roof. Not in Vermont. Well, we haven't.
We've used them
Maybe
a lot.
before my time.
No, I don't think we've done one.
Okay,
Look, past it.
well, that, anyways, that last one.
Yeah, I mean, people go with the single ply membrane roofs generally on these buildings because they're cost effective to build at first, not because they're. the
But
best
not for the
roof,
long term.
You know, yeah, they're not the best roofs.
Yeah.
No,
Okay.
but they're probably half the cost of,
Well, they are, yeah.
you know, so.
In thinking about making a decision in terms of do nothing. Renovate plus wing or new school. I think it all comes down to like a benefits versus cost. And you mentioned 21st century educational design principles for physical structures. So what I'd like to see is, okay, you know, just, what are the benefits of those three options? You know, so we can figure out, okay, you know, we get this for X amount of dollars. But we could have this for X amount of dollars, and obviously,
Well, we have
So
some pros and
here's-
no,
cons.
I'm not talking about,
Yeah.
dollars.
No, no, but there, but the slide we've got from the report, which this is on the website. So I know a number of you have it in the binder that you've made.
Yeah, what,
You know, this starts that process. It doesn't give you every detail I think you might be looking for, but it's there. I mean, there, you know, you
Yeah.
can see that, you know, one design does less, cost less, one design does more, cost more. One design gives us the best facility for our kids, but costs more.
Right, we
So-
assume it costs more.
Yeah, and it's, and the, you know, we heard earlier that the differential in cost is there, but it's not as dramatic as you might think. To go from option 1 to option 3 is not,
You said this was on the website?
this is on the web,
School website?
I can, yeah, linked from the school website, there's a building project website now. That
There's a whole
has,
separate page that's been created that.
Yeah.
Where all this stuff is being collected, but you can get to it by going to the Danville School.
And you can have my
Yeah.
binder at the end.
yeah, and if you have trouble finding any,
Over 211.
yeah, and anything you're having trouble finding, let me know, call the school, we can get it for you, send you a link, send it on paper if you have to. Make Thomas bike over to your house, whatever, he drives now.
Probably the thing that needs the most unpacking on that list, that's maybe is not a complete list. I mean, if you want us to try and expand the list and think more deeply about this, we certainly can do that. The thing that probably needs the most unpacking on that list is this notion of what is best investment. You see under option 3, the bullet line is best investment. What that is, what we're trying to communicate there is that when you do a project like this, if you were to renovate this school in place with students still coming to school every day, probably 10 to 15% of the cost of the project is just managing the site as a
Mhm.
live site.
right,
When you bring in a contract, and that's probably why those costs of those renovation options are approaching the cost of the new build. Because when a contractor has a free, clean greenfield site, they can come in, they can bull and jam, they get it done as fast as possible, and then they're out of there. And there's less disruption. So more of the money that the community spends for a new school is gonna actually go into the asset itself. Right?
Mhm.
And that just means that your dollars are being spent on something that remains rather than something that is a temporary condition meant to enable the work to happen.
I have a stepson who's an electrician who said to me. That when you're doing something like this. If you're renovating, you're less likely to get the better contractors to bid.
That's true.
On the site because they don't want to deal with this. And that you're more likely to get better bids on a new school just for the reasons that you're talking about.
It's a lot cleaner.
Not only that, the risks are a lot lower. I mean, even from us. I mean,
Yeah.
just for everyone, I want to be really open and honest about this. We are not perfect either. Architects are, we're human beings and we also make mistakes. And when we're designing something that's brand new and clean, we're in control of everything. When we're designing a renovation project, we're in control of almost nothing. And we're reacting to what's there. And we will make more mistakes. We will make mistakes that will cost more money to rectify. And
Your basis, I agree 100%, your basis. On that isn't nothing, it's 32.3 million. Because you have to, if you do nothing, the school will deteriorate and it'll be gone. So your basis is 32.3 million. That's where you're starting, where I'm coming
yeah,
from.
plus soft costs and everything.
Plus soft
It's probably
costs
more
and
like
everything.
45 when you're all
So,
done.
so you're, to just repair this facility, you're already into 30 to 40 million dollars.
Correct.
Because of the deferred maintenance costs that have occurred. Over all this time.
Yeah, and you haven't addressed the educational deficiencies. That's the biggest thing.
Well,
If you-
not only that, this school was not designed
it was, you had a building, you add, then you came to a structure like this.
Yeah, and its levels are crazy.
Crazy.
And
I'm not,
yeah, this is typical. This is just this is how Vermont schools are.
I guess what I'm saying is that I would like the decision to be informed by. Okay. Informed by. Educational design principles. So that, that's the quality side. And then we got the cost side and the physical structure side.
I see.
So I think there has to be some deep thinking about, what are we really buying here educationally?
Yeah, I think you're right, and that points to that bullet of purpose built. Right, and that is maybe not elaborate enough to describe how deep. How I think that the benefit of a new school is a little bit voodoo. But the truth is that when you're starting with a tabula rasa, with a blank slate, you can do things that you can't do when you're constrained by an existing building. So because right now, for instance, most of the schools double loaded corridors, right? Middle schools are team-based. And we don't generally design middle schools as double loaded corridors with a corridor down the middle of the building and classrooms on either side. Middle schools are designed as clusters because the students work in a team. That's something that can be addressed in a new build. Elementary schools are a lot in the same way in many ways because they team based on the level of education. So you'll have little clusters for K, pre-K and K and 1, 2, because the education of those children is very different than high school. High schools are fine as double loaded corridor because it's departmental and the kids go from class to class to class. So all of those things are addressed in a much more elegant way when you design something that's new from the ground up. You're always kind of trying to smush those ideals into a pre-existing die when you're renovating an old school, because the truth is that these schools were designed 40, 50, 60 years ago for an education model that's 100 years old.
Yeah, right.
And I will also bring up the point that we actually, so aside from just the better quality of education, we do have some measurable ROI on education. David mentioned in an earlier meeting that the Connect program that he started up has brought 6 of the 8 kids that are there are choice kids. So the more programs you have, the more choice kids that we have because we live around choice now. Sure.
On that, thanks for the introduction here. With the
Yes, we have your
tech
capacity.
programs, and if you put in a new auditorium and stuff like that, a proper auditorium. So if you can bring in 13 tuition students at 19,000 a year for 30 years is $7.4 million. So if we just had some aggressive recruitment and make sure that you have whatever you have now, plus 13 tuition students because of all the new shiny stuff. That $7 million goes away.
It's a strong draw.
I mean, I just really want to understand. It's not happening tonight or in a month, but. What are the educational benefits of these different alternatives?
Right.
That's the quality,
It's doable.
that's the benefit side. We got the cost side, we sort of got a little handle on the construction side, but we need to get be thoughtful about the benefit side.
Can I say a little bit about that? Before
Please.
you- So, reflecting back on a conversation I had with folks in the new scheme, they had to do the renovation in place because they didn't have property. Okay, so they couldn't have built a new school. And I talked to the superintendent, and he said, if we'd had a chunk of land somewhere, we might have done something different, proposed something different. They had to renovate in place. In a perverse way, they actually had benefited from COVID-19 because there was a period of time when they didn't have a lot of students in the school, and so the disruption to the learning environment because of the construction was minimized. They still had disruption because of COVID-19, but that happened to all of us, okay?
Mhm.
But they actually, I was told that they were actually in some areas able to accelerate some of their work because, you know, that, I don't remember, it was 20 or 21, but they didn't have kids in the building, okay?
Mhm.
Coming out of 27 month pandemic, like we just did, and just really getting kids back and getting focused on getting them back in school and getting them caught up on anything that they might have missed. The thought of doing anything where the kids are in this building and we're working around them just makes me sick to my stomach from an educational perspective, because on top of the pandemic, now we're potentially gonna go and we're gonna disrupt the learning environment for 2.5 years or whatever it takes to do the renovation and expand it. Just doesn't, to me, that's a big piece of it right there.
How
It
many
only
years-
comes if we decide to and get approval to build a new building, but.
How many years has Winooski been, because they aren't done yet.
They're finishing up,
They got about 4 weeks left.
yeah, they're finishing up that next month. How long have they been at it, Cam? 2.5 years?
They broke ground on June 6th. 2020. Wow. And
Right in the early days of the pandemic.
yeah, we started design in, I want to say August of 2019. So that's about 3+ years from this, from when they said go. To when they're gonna finally cut the ribbon.
Right.
And they've got a lot of new space. I mean, one of the things I was gonna say was it might be instructive in this group to kind of understand more viscerally what the impact could be to education. To take a trip up there and walk through the school. And then you'll be able to see because there was 2 significant classroom wings that were built as additions to the school. And those are purpose-built 21st century education spaces. You could walk through those and then walk through a 1957 wing that was renovated. And you can see the difference for yourself. But educators are gonna be the people who can better address your question.
Exactly.
Than me.
But it has to be integrated into what we're doing.
Yeah.
So the educators need to inform. They have to talk to the benefit side.
Mhm.
Right.
How long would it take to build a new street? 2 years. Yeah, apologize, I'm using a calculator here. So if we assume let's assume $70 million construction, and most I've ever seen is $3 million a month. So that's 23 months. It is.
Yeah, that's about it.
And it's probably 2.5 years to do a renovation in place, because they won't be able to go as fast. They lose time just for moving, because what happens when you do a renovation and addition project is the first thing that happens is they build the addition. And that takes, a year. At Winooski, it took a year. They built the 2 big classroom additions. It took the first year. And then the kids vacated portions of the school into those new wings to free up space to get renovated. Then they finished those areas and moved into those and moved out of others. So it's like a shell
Right.
game,
Right.
so people move 3-4 times. It's hard on the little kids because they, you want to try and not move their classroom.
But what's Burlington gonna do? Tear down everything they've got, build in the same place,
That's the plan.
That's the plan.
tear it down.
Tear it down and build a new high school on the same site, a little bit to the east of the existing school.
But they're gonna build a new school and then tear down the old one?
Well, currently
Last I
they're
heard
not
they were
in the
gonna
old
level
building.
it.
They
That's
started
right.
to decamp to the Macy's downtown, so that they.
Right, they've been a few years on the lease.
Downtown.
How's that work?
It's
the
not
only
a great
school.
facility.
The only school in Vermont with an escalator though.
I was gonna say, I mean, the Macy's in Danville, I don't think can hold us, so.
No, that's been a disaster for
Or the one
Burlington.
in Mar-
They had to move their high
Yeah,
school to
St. J.
Macy's.
Oh, because
Yeah.
Nobody's happy about
That's
that.
because of PCDs, which is a whole other, whole other can of worms.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
So,
let's not
I-
talk about PCBs right
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I think that
March.
a Winooski tour would be a pretty cool thing to do. So there is gonna be one. I'd like to go.
I make a comment, Gary, to your point about the educators informing this.
Mhm.
2-something years ago, when we first started this process, we did have a community night with teachers, and there were conversations with teachers about what would be helpful for them. So their input was informed, I believe, if I'm saying that
Yes.
correctly, with these designs about how they wanted classrooms to be situated. So they, educators from the school did have input on that.
Did they get written down someplace?
Yes, we have all that data. For the-
Minutes
Can't
and
have
stuff.
that.
in the meetings.
It's in
The other-
the design.
The other thing is that once we know what the board wants to do. And we start doing that work, there is a lot of work that we are gonna have to do to sell this to the community. And that will be the opportunity to address the points that you're making, the points that you're making about that everybody's making. These are all good, factoids and pieces of information to take into consideration, but some of them don't have to be addressed until we know what direction we're going in.
I
And
did,
It's easy to get caught up with, well, 3 years from now, where are we gonna be? We gotta narrow the view a little bit.
yeah, well, and one of the, I just wanted to quick segue in, I don't want to forget, you had a capacity, some capacity information, so before. I know we've gone a little bit over, but,
I'll make this very quick. So I look at the 1993. And I was able to get the yearbooks. Thank you for digging those up. And I counted little faces. And K through 6 in 1993 was 224. 7 through 12 was 194. 418. So your K through 6 was 53%. In 94, it was 219 and 218. And then in 95, they figured out a way, how can we make these yearbooks cheaper? They didn't do K through 6 anymore. So given that, let's assume that you have the same amount in K through 6 that you had in 7 through 12. So in 95, there would have been 464, in 96, 408, 97, 470, 98, 428. But these numbers do not factor in the 20, 25 kids that were in the CREEP program, with the early education. So it would be like pre-K. So if you add your pre-K in, we have, what, 30? We have 2 classes of 15 each.
yes, 30.
Okay, and it'd be nice if we had, I mean, if we have enough room available that you could pick up a third, okay? So now you're talking 45, you add 45 onto these numbers, and 3 of the years go over 500. So with a 450 student capacity, these numbers saying it's not gonna work. And I've only done 93 through 98. I can do other ones to see how we're doing, and I can submit this in a more formal than that, but I'm just concerned about 450 might not be enough.
Did we have a preschool program in those years?
Yes,
It was called CREEP.
it's called CREEP,
Free?
Caledonia Rural Early Education Program.
It's still called
Really?
Creek.
It's the word, yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Wow, it's a terrible name for early education.
Some of them are, but. I mean, mine were. And in that, they had to have, it was a room in the 1937 building, and it was one of the large rooms that had to have space for all the stuff that little pre-Ks do.
It was by the gym for a long time, that room by
Right.
the gym.
It was off site too.
Yeah,
For years, local daycare.
anyway.
Yeah, but like, if we have a flexible design
Mhm.
and we have a unique program, which are are brought in that draw but other students from other areas, that may increase the overall.
That, I think the important, the 450 number that you cited, I believe was that's what the target was for the space needed for option one, right? The addition, was it 450?
I believe it was a new building.
The new building.
New building.
New
Yeah,
building.
the capacity is probably gonna be a range.
Mm.
And it as a little bit depends on district policy, and forgive me, if I ever knew that I'd forgotten what the district policy is, but some grades have a lower capacity per classroom, like pre-K, for instance, just because of by statute. So there's gonna be a range, and I would look at this again. And probably submit, if this is something that we can do a capacity calculation. And candidly, the capacity can be based on whatever we want it to be. Right now, we're looking at number of classrooms. So that's, the other thing about capacity, is it's sometimes calculated by space per student allocation. In a school like this, we're going to be a little bit out of whack because it's a K through 12 district all under one roof.
Yeah.
And you've got a lot of spaces that are large in order to make that happen. And you've got the full suite of services for all grades, right? So, because in a traditional setting, if you had separated schools, elementary schools are generally smaller per student than high schools. But that's because elementary schools often don't have a full-size gym, they don't have an auditorium, you know what I mean? The kids eat their, in early elementary, the kids eat their lunches in classrooms sometimes, so. When you got the K through 12 district, we actually, our analysis shows that the projected size of the school is on the high side of square feet per student. And that's because of the way it's appointed. That's part of why in option 2, we're trying to drive down the square foot allocation per student by eliminating the second gym and turning it into a cafetorium. But all these things, it's all very flexible, right? So design is an iterative process. And that's why you see that these 3 options are all at very different levels of development. Because we iterated option 1 more times. And it's gotten more refined and we have better estimates of the cost. What we wanted to do was we wanted to push pause because the numbers were so jarring. And we wanted to expand the conversation to include the community, which is what this is all about. Because it's too big of a can of worms to wrestle with alone.
I think, I can do something up, better than this, so you can view it, so.
Okay.
If you want to table the rest of it, the rest of this discussion. we can
Sure,
go
yeah,
to
we can.
The next meeting.
Yeah. That's a good segue, I guess. We should figure out when is the next meeting. We don't have one on the calendar presently. We need, as a reminder, a school board member, a principal, and 4 members of the community to make a quorum. So we will need that. I don't know if Wednesdays continue to work for everybody.
Are you interested in Zabrowski's involvement or this stage? Or, because he has a program that meets these evenings, but I don't think it'll last much longer.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know, I've been thinking about that and I don't know him and what his skills are, but I don't see,
Well, I think.
I don't currently see an issue where we need
A good job.
a facilitator that way.
But if we
Exactly.
get into a big debate and arm wrestling,
Right.
then I think you would need to, then, yeah, but I think you're doing a good job. So
That, I saw Tom the other day, he said
Yeah.
that. Basically, he wasn't interested in doing it, so you may want to check with him.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
yeah.
Yes. Um,
For the next
Go forward.
2 Wednesdays, I know Marvin and I have a conflict because his grandson and my son are playing soccer on Wednesday nights for the next 2 weeks.
yeah, and
But-
in 2 weeks, I have a conflict. 'cause-
Well, in 2 weeks, there's a book fair in here too.
Oh, there's a book fair in here.
So it's the book fair.
All right,
library.
Oh, yeah.
Well,
So,
the agenda would drive it, wouldn't it?
yeah, so I think,
Yeah,
I
what are
think
we
what
gonna
we,
accomplish?
well,
Or-
I think what we, well, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I would love it if we get to some action steps. We've been doing a lot of talking and bringing everybody up to the same space, which is great, but I'm on the same page as Mark. I don't think we should hold off on doing more of this. We should meet as soon as everyone's available and get to the point of actually getting some community input, because that's what we need to do, is figure out how we're going to get input from the community, present all this great information that we have to them and get their input. So that, I don't think we should wait on that. That would be my agenda item.
Okay, yeah, and how, sorry, I'm being obtuse here, but, how would you, see getting sort of community input other than, coming and actually discussing some of these options and,
So a survey would be one way of doing
Okay.
it. We talked about possibly sending out a postcard that could have a link to a survey on it. You might get people who aren't actually from Danville that filled it out if you do something online. Oh, well, like, I don't know, there's various different options we could talk about for community input. It's late. I don't know if we want to talk about that tonight, but that I think needs to be our next action.
Yeah. Could we talk about how we go about it next meeting?
Yeah.
I think that would be good. It would also, I think be good to understand, I know that we have, some money in the, school budget to send out different things, so I'll get a clarification on that.
On voting day in November, can we have a pamphlet for all the registered voters to fill out and drop off? Is that okay?
Are we, yeah,
Is it legal?
Is that a little bit late?
No,
well, we won't be voting. in
Well,
November.
if we have discussion in mid to late October on what information do we want to get from the town, then we can have,
Mhm.
everybody that comes in and votes, all registered voters. And they can take a pamphlet and send it in or something like that. And
They maybe have a couple of questions that we ask that's there as well.
right, you can't have like 20 questions, you have
Yeah.
4, 5, 6 questions. And I think people take the time and drop it off in a box and.
I don't know the
It's got
legality of
400
that.
opinions.
So ballots went out in the mail today,
Yeah.
right?
I got
So-
one today.
I got mine.
Yeah, or they came to be
They are-
delivered today.
they're out there already.
So we missed at least that window.
Yeah, we're not on the, yeah, it wouldn't be a ballot. This would be.
No,
just
no, no,
a-
I know, I know that. I mean, a lot of people are gonna vote by mail because ballots went out by mail. So I suspect a number of people are gonna vote by mail because it arrived at their house. People who might ordinary, so we can still do it. But we won't get as many.
In the past, we've done postcards,
Yeah,
for schools, which seems to be a fairly effective way of broadcasting information, and it's probably about the right. You can only say so many things on a postcard, so you have to really be careful that your message is very direct and concise.
That might be the way to do it then,
Mark, you have
with so
something?
many ballots being mailed.
Yeah, just a couple points. I mean, and I want to be, this is not my committee. This is not my group, okay? I'm not a member. I'm here in kind of an advisory perspective, but is this the majority? Is this like the core of the group that's been coming for the last 2 or 3 or
Yes.
4 meetings or whatever? Let me just throw this out as a suggestion, start with a concern. I think there needs to be some kind of larger community forum to present this work.
Mhm.
But if you call a community forum meeting and you go into that forum and you start talking about the 4 different options, you've brought yourself back to square one. You're gonna spend 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 hours wrestling with the questions and the comments and the concerns that have already been processed within this group to a large extent, I think, from what I've heard, you know, tangentially or whatever. This is a suggestion part, would you give some thought to coming to consensus on what you think you want to recommend to the board? And then call a community forum and describe to that community forum the work that you've been doing. And that work has led you to be ready to make this recommendation, whatever it is, whichever 1, 2, 3, or 4, to the school board, and you would like community reaction to that option. Otherwise, you're just gonna look, you're gonna go right back to square one, and you're gonna have, you know, the people saying, you know, what's wrong with this building? And, you know, and everything that we've thrashed through for the last, not just while this group was formed, but over the 2+ years before that when we started doing this work.
Yeah, so I think, you know, there were a couple of remaining questions, but I think to that end, we should definitely start with a straw poll next meeting of where do we sit? Where do we think this is? I mean, we could do one now too, but it sounded like there was some things that people wanted to look into and understand a little bit more. So I would move that we put that into sort of the next meeting. But I think that's a really good place to start that. And then that will inform also how we want to go to the community, I think, and understand.
So.
'Cause I think
future
that
meeting,
we're gonna have a lot of
make sure I got it in the notes. So future meeting of action items would be straw poll of the group. And designing some kind of community input, whatever it might be, a forum or postcards or both, or a survey or whatever.
Yes.
Okay.
If
So
you have
dates.
consensus on what you want to recommend to the school board, I think that will
Yeah.
help to focus your attention on how you want to address it to the community. 'Cause
Absolutely.
right now, it's like the lens is this big, there's just 4 options, and you can be more focused and intentional about your description of what, because remember, you're tasked with making the recommendation to the board. So if you've reached a comfort level with making that recommendation, then you can start talking in terms of, I'm gonna say, selling it to the wider community, for lack of a better.
Yeah.
So does October 19th work for everybody?
The 19th is a Wednesday.
It's a
It's a
Wednesday, boys, oh, we could go to Winooski, visit there. Watch the boys soccer game and then have the meeting in their park.
No, does it have to be a Wednesday?
No, it doesn't have to be Wednesday. If another day works better.
I like it.
Folks want to explore the Winooski project, I would suggest that we wait until November, because they're gonna be completing the project. Inside the building, they still have some site work going on as they pull out and demobilize, but they're projected to finish the interior construction and work on the actual building itself on October 21st. Although, you know, if the papers call, I didn't say this, but if it slips a week, I wouldn't be surprised. They pass the pay threshold of getting.
He's on the.
Yeah, but to be clear, this is not Andrew McGregor. For
The latest update that I heard, everything was on time.
There we go. That's all the time, that's all we know.
But the material, logistic supply chain is throwing curveballs to everything. So anyway. Winooski School project is on time. So anyway, I would suggest waiting until the project is complete, because then you'll really get a better sense of it.
26, October 26th is a Wednesday.
Any games or?
It's
Do we
parent
want
teacher
that?
conference.
Yeah, I agree with Kate.
Wait a
Do
month.
we need to wait that long?
No.
I don't see a reason for us to wait a month
So-
unless other people have a reason.
And folks can always come, we can look at, we can do stuff.
So maybe
here
we
and
don't
then-
yeah,
need a Wednesday then.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Thursday night.
It can be a Wednesday if that works for everybody else.
Are we talking a week or two that we want to try to meet?
Get together next week.
We can do this by Zoom too. I could come in by Zoom because I may not be around.
Yeah.
That's all I care about.
So what's the date?
We're trying to find one. So Wednesdays don't work for some folks.
Okay.
The board-
Tuesdays or Thursdays work any better.
What about Thursday the 6th
It could
at
be
5:30?
Wednesday.
Thursday the
It's
6th.
next Thursday, it's a week from tomorrow.
Yeah.
Dave can't make it then.
What's that date?
Well, it's just a proposed idea, the 6th of October.
This is for the
Thursday
next
night.
meeting, not.
Or the week after that, on the 13th.
Yes, although we have the book fair, so we would need a different space.
Okay, so not, yeah,
It's
not
not a
that
great
week.
time to bring, we have, the book fair is in this space.
I don't know if folks would want us to be represented. I'm out of the office in Denver that week. The week of the October 10th.
I'm actually in the office in Baltimore that week.
It can be the 5th if that works for people. The soccer game is at home, so I can run over here after it's over.
Next week, the 5th work, I mean, we can push it a little bit later too.
If Sarah can attend, I
Yeah,
can't attend that. But if Sarah can, then we have one of the two principals.
Yeah,
I'll see if she's online right now.
Is it helpful for us to plan on one of us being, by the way, folks, this is Richard Dean. He's-
Yeah, thank you.
For the opportunity to introduce one of the principal at Tourist Homes, Dave and I are longtime colleagues, and have been part of this project for quite a few years now, but it seems like this is a great group and a great discussion tonight, and I appreciate having been here to kind of get an opportunity to introduce myself as well as to hear if the colleague discussion that's going on, so thanks.
excellent.
Is it helpful for us to plan on, I mean, because we're not, we've got fee available. And I don't want to spend your money, but I also don't want to be absent and have questions come up and people are kind of wondering.
I don't think it's as much about the design at this stage.
Yeah.
And really, I think it's more our own strategy as a group.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to let, this seems like a great group that's asking all the right questions. And wants to service the school community and children well, so we don't need to be here. But I don't want to leave people in the lurch, that's all. It's some ways better if you come to a consensus without outside influence.
I think for the next one, I think we're okay, and then.
Okay.
Yeah, if you don't mind, if we call you in like we did today, and
Call me in.
yeah, this has been wonderful that you've been able to come in and answer these questions, so thank you guys so much. For doing that.
It was nice to meet the guy in the video too.
I live in central Vermont, so I'm not far away.
Okay, oh, that's
All
good.
right, so back to meeting dates. I
So,
don't know if Sarah has, I mean, she hasn't.
Okay, so-
6, so she
Why don't you
hasn't.
set
checked
it tentatively for the 5th, and if that's not gonna work, we'll.
we have the email list, we can blast that if that doesn't work.
I
All right, so we'll do next week, 10:05 at 5:30, or do we want to do it a little bit later?
It can be 5:30, but Randy and I will be late, and Marvin.
We'll get back to the 6.
Six would be better, 'cause then we-
And then you'll only be a little late. but-
We can do 6
Okay,
or
thank
6:30.
you. No, six is great.
Okay, so building.
6 on the 5th.
advisory.
We'll send out, we'll put this in and we'll send that out
Yep.
to the, to that, and that means that we have to get the agenda up and running because we are within 7 days.
Yeah, so we can get that out.
Well,
I'll be around tomorrow.
You're not constrained by that.
I know we're not concerned.
So we're
about
trying
that.
to stick.
Try to stick to it, but don't, nobody's going to OML jail.
Okay, yeah, I'll be around tomorrow. if you want to
Excellent,
send me something.
sure thing, yeah.
Get it Going, and hopefully Sarah can attend, and then we can stick with it.
Excellent, all right,
Yeah.
Any other notes, comments, outbursts anybody wants to make, otherwise?
I have a.
No, I just, at the end of the day, in my mind, so. I need to understand, what does 70 million buy me education for students versus what is 77?
Yeah, and I, I don't have the detailed answer, but I've been saying to what Pam was saying. 70 million buys us half a building that is up to date, brand new. And the elementary school would have like state of the art new, and then we would fit the middle school and high school programs into the existing footprint. And so 70 million gets us our elementary wing what we want and need. 77 million gets us the whole package.
I encourage you to go, there's
There's more to that, but that's the start I've
the
got.
school board meetings where these are presented are online, where you can look at the video, where you can